Hi, and welcome everybody. This is going to be a super interesting episode. I feel like I'm going to learn so much today, and I'm just really excited to have you guys here and sharing your experience. It's such an important topic that I don't think is talked about enough. So, before we dive into the topic, of course, we're going to do introductions. I'm going to start with ladies first, and I'm going to let Billy start us off.
Hi, I am Billy. I am from the Pacific Northwest here in Oregon. I work in, I'll say I work in elder abuse. I also I instruct at our law enforcement academy. Separately, I am a domestic violence advocate with one of our local police departments, and in 4 days, I will be 8 months sober.
All
Yay!
right.
Awesome. Good for you. And yeah, for our listeners, you guys will probably recognize Billy because she's here on back-to-back episodes, which doesn't happen very often, but we're super honored and excited to have you with us again. So thanks
Thanks for
for
having me. Yeah.
being here. All right, next up is Chris. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks, guys. Chris McGuinn. I was 8 years sober in August. I work as the administrator for an outpatient addiction treatment program in DC. I've been in the industry for about 3 years running outpatients. And before that, I did federal opioids policy for workers' comp.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I love some of the. Do you want to talk a little bit about the more than 28 days program that you've
Yeah,
got?
so I think that those of us who work in the industry now have seen that insurance isn't covering even 28 days of residential treatment anymore, and that's kind of what most people think of as treatment. So more than 28 is about trying to make sure that insurance is giving people at the very minimum those 28 days of residential.
Awesome. Yeah, super, super important work that you're doing with that. So thank you for being here. Thanks for everything that you do in the recovery community. We really, really appreciate your hard work. All right, next up, we're gonna go with Dave. How are you?
I am well, thank you. I am Dave. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I am 2 years, 2 months sober, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming back. I'm gonna say we've known Dave since like we first got on social media. I
Yep.
think you were one of the very first accounts that we followed when we started the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna make sure that we have Dave's social media stuff in the show notes because he is also doing 75 hard, which I think is so cool, and sharing updates. And so I want everybody to know that they can watch your journey because I think it's really neat what you're doing.
Awesome,
So
thank you.
yeah, thanks for being here. And last but not least, we've got Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott McDonald. I'm over 2 years of sobriety. I'd have to do the math. I kind of stopped counting after 2 years, but that was in September. So whatever September plus now is. So I am a recovery coach at an outpatient facility, and on the side, I do the Sober Heathen podcast. I've had a lot of great guests on there. Have a lot of fun with that, and try to speak out when I can about different pathways. So that's kind of the goal of the podcast. So
Definitely. Yeah. Super, super happy to have you here. That's a really important thing to talk about too, is all the different pathways, because I know we kind of get stuck and we always need more voices to that conversation. So thanks for doing what you do, and we'll make sure we include your podcast link in our show notes also, and everybody can catch up with all the stuff you guys are doing. So yeah, so for our topic, when you have tried and tried on your own to get sober and you just can't get it to stick, one of the options that starts coming to mind is going to rehab. But for so many people, rehab is a really scary thought. Not only does it mean leaving home for up to a month and all of the logistics of that and also the emotional toll, but it also means walking into a situation that you just can't even imagine. There's a lot of emotional turmoil that happens when someone starts to consider rehab, a lot of unknown that makes it really scary. Our goal is to take away some of that unknown here. So we would love for you to share with us some of your fears, how you made the decision to go, and what it was like once you got there. And since Steve and I haven't been to rehab, we're just going to let these guys kind of take it and run with it, and we'll just jump in with some questions if we have any. So anybody's welcome to start.
I
yeah,
can go
I'll
ahead.
go.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Ladies first.
So something I never thought in my entire life I would ever say is rehab was my jam. Never in my entire life.
Look at
I,
everyone's nodding right now,
yeah,
by the way.
I fought inpatient rehab so freaking hard for 3 years. Just fought it tooth and nail. I did not have time to do this. I could not make time to get myself sober. I tried like regular outpatient. I tried intensive outpatient. I tried everything. I was like, absolutely, I'm not going to rehab. It's petrifying. It's mortifying. I am absolutely have no clue. Oh my gosh, I have to tell, what do I tell my employer? What do I tell my family? It was it was the scariest thing that I have ever done in my life. Also, it was literally the best thing I have ever done in my entire life. If I could go back and tell the old me everything that I learned and experienced in rehab and let them know so many years prior, when I was struggling, that it would be okay and that, let them know everything about rehab. Gosh, I wish I could have done that. Man, rehab, when I walked in, had the intent I wasn't going to talk to anybody. I wasn't going to make any friends. I wasn't going to talk in group. I was just there to essentially detox. I did 28 days or thereabouts. I think I went home a few days early. By the time I left rehab, I didn't want to go. It was such a safe space that had that it had become that I literally was like, can I stay longer? In my head. Obviously, I wanted to get home to my family, but man, rehab was a blessing. I wish I could have gone back and told my old self all of the beautiful things that happen. I'll let someone else jump in, and then I'll talk a little bit more about my experience.
Yeah, I'll go. So the first one I went to was like pulling teeth to get me to do it. I remember the day. I remember standing in the kitchen. I'm not sure if she's my fiance at the time or not, maybe just girlfriend. But anyway, her son came up to me and gave me a big hug with tears in his eyes and said, "Scott, you got to go," because it was just out of control. And even I think he was 9 or 10 maybe at the time. He even knew it at that age. And it wasn't like I was like a crazy person or abusive person or anything like that, but I was definitely passed out all over the place all the time. And so when he did that, I was like, okay, I'll go. And so the first one was all the things like Billy said, and all the things that they kind of mentioned in the preview of this thing. It was terrifying. I went in. I immediately started measuring myself against other people. Like, man, I don't look that bad. Man, I'd hear a story. Oh, I'm not that bad. And then I remember being there, and like in 2 hours, this dude was trying to crawl into one of the stacked dryers because he thought it was a spaceship. And I was like, dude, that ain't me. You know what I mean? Like, but after some time, the therapist was pretty good. It wasn't bad, but I got released a couple days early, which I shouldn't have done. This first one was basically watching TV and playing pool. So I got out of that one, and I ended up. It didn't do anything. I mean, I lost a bunch of weight. I got out. I felt like $1,000,000. I was wearing a pink bandana, walking around. I'm like, I got this. This is easy. And I locked down. Well, the wheels completely fell off, and Miley had to set a boundary. It wasn't that she didn't love me, but she had to do what was right for her and her son. She didn't want to see me just laying around, passed out. She was worried that I was going to go drive somewhere. She found me all over the friggin' town, passed out in different places. So she finally set the boundary. And once I had spent my 40th birthday all by myself, my kids didn't call, she didn't call, no, I was all by myself. And 40 is supposed to be a big one, you know what I mean? And so that hurt. And I finally decided one day that I need to do something. And so I called the insurance company, and they suggested to me Harbor Hall in Petoskey, Michigan. So if anybody's in that area and you can get to Harbor Hall, I highly suggest it. I went to Harbor Hall for 60 days, got out. 4 hours later, I fell flat on my face. It wasn't the program. I'd met a bunch of people that I cared about. But I went for that 60 days, and I got home, and the real world was still there. And, it wasn't from a lack of trying with me. I did put the effort in. Everybody was voting me to be. You had these officers. I can't remember what they called them. In the house. That's kind of a big deal. Look at all these good things I'm doing. So then I left the second one, and I had the worst month of my life, and ended up back in the same place. And Billy, I totally get what you're saying. I was there for almost 90 days, and then moved into their sober living house for men next door. And all in all, and you get 90 days in that, I believe. So all in all, I was there for almost 200 days. And I was just talking about it in one of my groups at work, and one of the clients were talking about treatment, and was like, she agreed with me. She's like, yeah, if I could go back for like a week, I would love to do that, or like a weekend. And it was just so great. The people were so great, and they cared. They truly cared. You know what I mean? Like it was a second family. And I was actually in a meeting today at work. The guy that ran the sober living house was in the meeting, and it was like, oh, dude, like my buddy. And so, yeah, it's terrifying. It can be scary, and there are some bad treatment centers out there. But if you find one, and if you're honest with yourself, I think that's the key. If you get in there and just like, I just want to get the hell out of here, go home and play video games, or go back to work, or go back to whatever I was doing. If you give it a chance and it truly isn't a bad one, then go ahead and try a different one. But man, when you find the right one, sounds like Billy found a good one too. Holy crap! It's like, it sounds silly, but it was like a second home.
Hmm.
I'll shut up.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
see everyone nodding to that
Yeah.
same statement right there. It's like a second home. Like you feel very comfortable in that spot, and you have no problems walking back in there. Just to like that, to me sounds incredible. Like I'll go back for a week just to hang out with those people and do some of that work with those people, and it's that safe of a place. I think it's like I'd spend a vacation there, a weekend there. That's
100%.
really awesome.
We've been
So
lucky enough, Steve and I have been lucky enough to do some get-togethers with people that we've met in recovery. I mean, so much of our recovery has been online, but we've been lucky enough to do some in-person gatherings with like 20 or 25 people getting together all in one space, spending, 4 or 5 days together. And I imagine that's what it's like, because for those 4 or 5 days, like, you are surrounded by people who get you, and by people who are absolutely safe and just want what's best for you. And everybody is so like real and raw and vulnerable. And it just creates like instant connection. So when you guys talk about it, that's what I imagine that it's probably like, is being surrounded by a group of just people who really do feel like a safe family to be with.
Yeah, I want to. I've actually gone back and done it. I've actually audited rehab. So, I was part of the reason why I advocate so hard is that I got to go to a very good cash pay private facility, and was not dependent on insurance for the kind of treatment that I got, and I was able to go for 7 weeks, and we have a Monday night 90-minute crosstalk process group, and I've been on that call. I have missed maybe in 8 years a dozen Mondays, and I'm going back in 2 weeks for a reunion. I mean, we have reunions like it's a college, and we go back, and the therapists are going to do free workshops for everybody on Saturday, and we're going to like talk about family of origin issues, and we're going to get into it. And it really is kind of like I'm not gonna lie, like there are people who I was in rehab with who annoyed the heck out of me, who like were just toxic, and who I like passionately disliked. And you've got to, here I was with, I'm talking about people who were partners at law firms, and executives, and sort of like really, I was young for the program I went to, and they're people mostly in their like 50s and 60s, right, and even some people who are in their 70s. And it was amazing how everybody turned into summer camp. Like everybody was acting like a 14-year-old away from home for the first time, right? And there were just some dynamics that were just, it's like look in the mirror, like, dude, you're, you're a little too old to be arguing about what radio station is playing, and like we're all fighting to get into the front seat of the van like all the time. And it's like, dude, you're 60, like calm down a little bit. But
Mm.
but I loved it because it taught me a lot about myself, right? And there was like, nobody likes going to experiential group and having to stand up. It's a lot easier to sit in a circle and talk about yourself. But at the end of the day, was more in touch with who I am authentically than I was before I went in. And I'm always going to be grateful to rehab for that. So I don't want to like pile on to this love fest and be like, oh, rehab was great. And, you know, the food was there and, you know, everybody was my best friend and we all clicked. It's like, no, they're super annoying people who bother you. But in the end, on balance, it's worth it.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Billy, I just want to go back to you the way you described it. Like I was getting chills while you were talking about it. Like it's such a crazy experience to think back on. You know, when I went, I had the same fears. I had no idea what to expect. And I went in scared and went in similar to what Scott was saying. Like there were people around me that I was like, what, had lost family, had restraining orders against them, and lost homes. And you know, I had to battle that with myself. Like I'm like, what am I doing here? Like I didn't lose all that. Why am I in this place? But when you lock in and realize that you're there for yourself and it's your story, your journey, your battle with yourself that you have to figure out, and you start putting in that work on yourself, that's when you really get to embrace the rehab experience, and it becomes so meaningful and so powerful to you. And I did so much work and learned so much while I was there, that when you get out, you think you have all the tools, all the answers, and I walk out with my notebook, but then, yeah, the real world kind of smacks you in the face, and you're like, oh wait, hold on, I don't have a page in my notebook that's going to tell me how to navigate real time situations that are happening. You know, because normally I was turning to go to the liquor store if I had a stressful day or the kids were crazy or whatever the reason was I wanted to make up so I could drink. That part, life after rehab, was really hard, really hard.
I
Okay.
think for me, and oh,
No,
I think for
go.
me in my experience, it took 3 days for me to detox. So, going in with that, I'm not talking to anybody. Like I just came out of my room to get water, to go to the little cafeteria part to get water. They would bring in my meals and I was miserable, not as miserable. And that's part of, for people that are considering going to rehab, that medical detox component makes it significantly more comfortable in a medically supervised setting, than trying to do it at home alone when you're, because I tried that too, when you're shaking and sweating and it's just awful.
It's awful.
Awful,
Yeah.
awful, awful. I wish that on absolutely no one.
No.
But, those first 3 days of detox and then, again, going in with that mindset of I'm not going to talk to anybody. And there were people as I was going in to get water that were like, hey, how's it going? It's going to get better. Hey, hold on, hold on. It's going to get better. And so then after 3 days, I started, we had group therapy, we had individual therapy, I had an amazing therapist, we had art therapy. I discovered my drinking came from trauma, and so much trauma that I thought that I had dealt with in therapy that I hadn't, that I was absolutely forced to being 100% sober, right? Without the alcohol to fall back on, at any given point. And like Julie, you were talking about that, those connections that you made. I made connections in those 28 days with people, those true deep bonds, kind of trauma bonds, right? There's so many people were there using or drinking for the same traumatic reasons that I had experienced either in childhood or in adulthood, that I was able to talk to, that absolutely no one else, not one person, not my therapist, could ever sit down, look me in the eye and say, I get it. I know exactly what you are going through. And that was really pivotal for me because I thought I was so alone. I felt so fucking alone throughout my entire life with this. And to have those connections, and we literally called each other the Breakfast Club because it was so eclectic. Like we had the princess, we had the rocker, we had the, you know, like the football person, we had a cowboy, we had a dancer. Like we had this incredible group of people that I literally would never be friends with probably if I hadn't have met them in
Mhm.
rehab. But those connections that I made in rehab made that experience so much easier to open up with in group, so much easier for me to reach inside myself and understand my own drinking. And it was that 28 days was something, it was a period in my life where all I had to do was to focus on myself. And I had not had that, I don't know if ever. I didn't have to be doing dishes, laundry. I didn't have to go to work. I didn't have to make sure the kids were someplace at any particular given moment. It was almost 30 days of me focusing on me, hands down, the best part of rehab.
I want to ask you a question really quick, Billy, because I think it's something that's going to come into a lot of people's minds. Earlier, when you were talking, you mentioned like some of the thoughts that go through your head or what do I have to tell my employer? What do I tell my family? What are they going to think? So, what was that like for you? What did you tell your employer? How did they respond? What was that experience like?
It was so beautiful. I was again petrified. I wrote it drunk, right? I wrote the email drunk before going to rehab because that's what you do. You drink or you use, I'm assuming, because you know you're not going to be able to get that. So I wrote the email absolutely drunk. When I went back and read it, I was mortified. Um, but I wrote it to my manager and to my lead worker and basically said, this is where I'm at. Um, I I have to do this for myself. I work for the government, so it was highly protected. I know that HIPAA's protected, but substance use disorder HIPAA is that extra layer of protection. And when I got back, I had a one-on-one with my lead worker, amazing gentleman, and he said, Billy, I had to do this 3 years ago.
Whoa.
I'm so proud of you. And I would have never guessed
Mhm.
in my
Mm.
entire life. But he said, I had to do this 3 years ago. Isn't it amazing how you're not always thinking about drinking now, how you're not planning your day around it? He could relate to me. So just by telling those two people, making that very scary step of, talking to my employer about it, I got an ally. And I'm sure that that's not going to be everybody's experience. My husband 100% supported me in going. My daughter 100% supported me in going, and kind of advocated me like, you need to do this for you, mom, and was fantastic.
And your daughter's a teenager, right?
She's
So
a
she's old enough
teenager,
to understand what was going on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And um, I had an extra layer of guilt because her dad had gone to rehab in 2020, and I felt like, man, how have I disappointed her, right? I was there and strong in 2020 for her, and then look at me now. Like, how did I not learn any lessons? So there was an extra layer of guilt with that. She's been an amazing supporter and advocate.
Awesome.
Can I chime in with just a quick policy note? So, if anyone's listening to this who is unsure about this, if you're finding this because what Billy's talking about is 42 CFR Part 2, which is substance use records, which are again highly protected, but also, recovery is covered under the Americans with Disability Act as a disability. And so if you're going into residential treatment where, right, you have to be gone for a time, you can even use your company's short-term disability plan and have income coming in for your family if that's an obstacle. We know that women are much less likely to seek treatment than men, and the reason is because they have, obligations as usually as the primary caretaker, either of children or of parents. And so, there is money through your company's employer short-term disability plan, and your treatment center will be able to help you fill out that paperwork and get you the appropriate doctor's note to get that done.
Is that national or does that vary by state?
It varies by insurance carrier because the short-term disabilities are
Okay.
private policies. So, I don't, you're your benefits package may or may not include short-term or long-term disability. At the very least, you can take FMLA if you have more than 20 employees at your company, or maybe it's 30. But that's unpaid. FMLA just requires that they hold your job for you
Okay.
until you're back.
Okay. I just
Or-
know that's a big scary thing. Like trying to put myself in those shoes. What happens if you have to be away and, can your employer be like, I don't want you back because you're struggling with alcohol? Like those aren't options, right? That can't happen.
That can't happen.
I think
Shouldn't
that's one of,
happen.
I feel like that's one of the major fears about people telling their employer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, one of the reasons why once again, I didn't go to rehab, but one of the reasons why I told my employer was because I knew the laws well enough that if I said, listen, I have a problem, I'm going to start working on it. They had they had less a leg to stand on if they wanted to remove me from my position or something like that because they knew I was getting help, right? I came out and said it before them coming to me and saying, "Hey, listen, like you better go and do something, or I'm gonna have to remove you from your position, or you're gonna get a demotion, or whatever that is, because we can tell that you're suffering, or you're not performing, or whatever it is." The way I saw it was, is if I got ahead of it and said it to them, as opposed to them telling me, then I was ahead of the game. I was in Canada, mind you,
Hmm. Right.
but that's the way I understood it. So I'm pretty sure it's kind of that way here too.
It is, and it's also you bring up a point, which is if you self-report, things are going to go better for you than if your employer takes action, because the
Mhm.
way the law is written in America is sort of backwards. Active addiction is not a covered disability, but recovery is. So your job can fire you for being in active addiction, unable to perform your duties, but if you are trying to get help, that's a covered disability. So when you are taking the action, you're doing everything you can to protect yourself, both emotionally, physically, financially. It's the best choice you can make.
And I know
Awesome.
in Oregon, we have our unemployment laws actually incorporate that. So if you quit because you need to go into treatment, or if you get fired from a job because, let's say, something terrible happened and you've lost your job due to showing up drunk or performance, we have a clause in Oregon. If you get help within like 10 days, um, you actually get unemployment benefits. So if
Hmm.
you enter treatment, you
That's great.
actually get unemployment benefits, which is fantastic.
Really cool. Yeah. Yeah, Chris, I'm really glad you're here just to share some of this stuff
Yes.
because it is so unfamiliar and so scary to even think about. What about you guys, Scott and Dave? How did that go with your employer or that stuff? How'd you deal with that?
Yeah, I think like this is all awesome information and information that like I now know, right? But leading up to it, I didn't know, which prevents you from putting a voice on it because you're like, I don't want to deal with all the logistics of it. What's going to happen to me if I say it? All the logistics, and on top of it, like society's views or my family's views once I say that I need help. But now looking back, that was the start of me beginning to feel freedom by just putting voice out there saying I needed help. And then the support that came my way after that through my employment, my family, my friends, all things I didn't think I was going to get because of saying I needed to go to recovery and I needed help. I didn't think that that was going to be welcomed with open arms. Um, I wish everyone who is struggling knew all of this information that would help guide them on the path they need to get
Yes.
the help that they need. And I just don't think it's talked about enough. There's just not a lot of um, um, discussions about it, and the tools, the resources that are available to everybody, like knowing that their job's protected and things like that, and that's just unfortunate. But with my job, I was one of the lucky ones that had a ton of support. And I chose the day that I chose to put a voice on it. I told myself I was going to be open, honest, and loud about it. And I called my work. I told my boss, you don't have to hide it from anybody that works here. You can let them know where I'm at. I'm going to rehab, and I'm not going to shy away from it. And I wanted to dive into the whole process head first, because it's not something I want to do over and over again. It's something I wanted to get in and get it done the right way. And so far, it's been working out for me.
What do you got, Scott?
Yeah, so I think something important there is, you know, you don't want to talk about it. But the thing is, and it's really important to understand this, that once you get it out there and kind of own it with the people that you need to, the weight and freedom that you feel from doing that is incredible. It's almost like a good buzz that you get. Like, you know, at work, I had to leave work early yesterday to go talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. Like, it's so freeing just to be open about this stuff. There was a client sitting in the lobby and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing, part time?" And I'm like, "I'm off to see a bankruptcy lawyer. See ya." And some of my coworkers like, "What are you doing?" And it's like, I don't care. You know, I've been the guy that wore a t-shirt for pants to the gas station. So if I can handle that crap, I can be honest and open. And I wanted to say something too, to add to, so people, that if there is somebody listening, contemplating going into treatment, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. When you get there, they're going to go through all your crap and they're going to see everything that you bring. So if you got a little teddy bear or something tucked in there, they're going to see it. They're going to make you go to bed when they want you to go to bed. They're going to feed you what they're going to feed you. And it's not like you get to go up and choose. You know what I mean?
We did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
We didn't. We didn't. It was pancakes and flat sausages every morning, it seemed like. But so every place is different, but you might go to a place where, you know, they'll tell you when you can smoke, when you can't smoke. They'll tell you what you can eat. And again, they're going to make you go to bed when they want you to go to bed. But you know what that does? It gives you a good night's sleep for the first time in how long. It makes you eat not crappy food 3 times a day. So it gets you back into a routine. And I think Billy said too, is a reset. You got to reset everything that's in there. So yeah, it might suck. I don't want somebody telling me when to go to bed. I want to smoke when I want to smoke. These things are just to take the pressure off. So you don't have to plan anything. You get into treatment, everything's lined up for you. And that's actually a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it's not sunshine and rainbows, but what you get from yourself, and here when you walk out those doors is invaluable.
Well, yeah, we've lived a life in pure chaos for so long that when somebody tries to put structure on it, you're like, hold on, what are you doing? You're not even realizing like you need that structure, you know?
Yeah.
You mean I'm supposed to shower every day? What? You know what I mean? Like simple, simple things, you know what I mean? It's the simplest of things that in the moment you're like, I don't want to do any of this stuff, but then you realize like, oh, like eating 3 times a day is kind of a normal thing that people do, you know? But you fought against it for so long, and just living in chaos and scheduling your time around alcohol that you didn't have any time for anything else.
Yeah. I think to piggyback on that, it's not sunshine and roses, because I know that I've just spouted out a bunch of sunshine and roses stuff about treatment. I think that if I could give advice to those that I wish that I would have known, when you leave treatment, your sobriety is your own. And you develop all these deep friendships and these deep bonds, and you wish the best for absolutely everybody. And, you know, we still have we call it the Breakfast Club, text list, but slowly people have started to drop those that I were the most closest to. There was one that I particularly had, developed a very deep friendship, deep bond with, and relapsed and became, from what I know now, an incredibly mean drunk. And he was the kindest person in rehab. And he was psychologically and verbally abusive to the point where I had to be like, I wanted to help him so bad, but you can't have your sobriety tied up in because you become invested, in the success of these other people. You have to make sure that you put your own sobriety first, because man, I really, really tried to make sure everybody was okay, because that's the type of person that I am, especially those that I was closest to. But, take care of yourself when you get out, and just know that everybody's not going to be they're going to be on their own journeys.
For sure. So let me
It-
ask you guys this. You guys have talked about, everybody's mentioned doing the work at rehab, getting to know yourself, all of the things that you did. Dave, you talked about your tools in the toolbox. Can you guys describe what quote unquote the work is? What can like what does somebody expect when they go in? What does that look like?
I, I think what everybody's sort of said is that they have to talk and own all of their stuff, right? And I think you're our addiction, whatever your drug of choice is, we're using it to try to control things, right? Or we're out of control inside, and we think we're controlling things by managing. And when, as Scott says, finally somebody is there to take control from you and take care of everything else, so that the only thing you need to focus on is, what's in your head and dealing with it, and not medicating it or hiding it or denying it. You've got to deal with it. And so it's saying embarrassing things to other people in group. Like, I'll say it here, right? I would get drunk and I would wet the bed, and that's really embarrassing. But I know, there's a lot of people out there who drink too much, who went through that. But it's scary to say that stuff. You've been trying to hide it from everybody for so long that you now need to just let it all out, and in a group of people who are going through the same stuff, and learn that you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think somebody said being honest with yourself, and I think that's super important to open up and put all those things out there. If you go in and you're going to half-ass it, you're not going to get the results that you're really looking for. You're going to get exactly what you put into it, and I think it's really important. I think that's what I mean for the work, was to just be honest and lay it all out there. I made that trek. I flew halfway across the country to be in rehab, so I needed to really put in the work to do it. And yeah, that's what that means for me.
Yeah, I think AA uses the word honesty a lot. I like the word authenticity, or being authentic. I think it's super important when you get into treatment. If you don't like something, or something is bothering you, even if it's another person, let that be. Say what you actually think. That's the only way. And I think that honestly, the best therapist is when the audio comes out through your mouth and you get to replay it through your ears and
The
process
best
it.
way to do it.
Yeah, I've heard so many times. I've heard myself say something really dumb, and it comes out like, "Good Lord, that's the work that I'm talking about." Honesty and authenticity. Talk and use those filters, man. And I'll tell you something that might be weird for a lot of people. I journaled a ton. I mean, a ton, and that might be weird for some dudes. Like, oh, a diary. It's whatever. Call it whatever you want. Boy, it was super helpful to, again, put it on the paper and then filter it back through the eyes.
Yep.
I think I would agree with what everybody just said. Adding that component of vulnerability. I'm not a vulnerable person. I come from a background of law enforcement. I'm not a vulnerable person. I went in there as 100% shut down, not wanting to show vulnerabilities. And that's not what happened. And I think because I was vulnerable, it was success. And like Dave said, whatever you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. And I could tell the people that were putting in the bare minimum, that didn't participate in group, that sat there with their arms crossed. And even though mine was a voluntary program, it was, if you're in Oregon, Brookside is an absolutely amazing facility. It's a voluntary program. I wondered how voluntary it was for some of the people, whether it was, spouses that were like, you do this or I'm leaving you, or, other things like that. But you could tell, the people that weren't putting in the work and didn't want to be vulnerable and authentic and honest.
So another
Yeah,
question for you guys, just listening to what a couple of you have said. How do you find a good rehab? Like, did you
Yeah,
guys
I
actually
just wrote
do
that
some
down.
research and choose something, or did you just go wherever your insurance told you to go? And like, what does that look like? I know it's probably
yeah,
different for everyone, but
yeah. For me, I called our employee assistance program, and they did an awesome job of finding it for me. I called on a Thursday. They said they had found a place for me to go, and I could be in there on Sunday. And I was like, cool, I'll do that. And I got off the phone and my girlfriend gave me this look of like, leaving on Sunday? Like, there's no way you're going to go if you wait till Sunday. And I was like, right, got it. I just had to look at her and I knew. So I called back and I was like, actually, do you have something today? And within 4 hours, I was in a flight on my way to California.
Awesome.
Wow.
I think I knew what
Love
I
it.
didn't want because I was completely treatment naive. Like I had no idea what treatment world was like. And so I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to be in a hospital ward with a locked door and a chain link fence. And like it was for me, again, it was all about control and everything. And so I knew what I didn't want. So they presented me with we had an interventionist who had helped us shepherd us, and they gave me a list of places and I looked them up online and I was like, no, this place has like a fifth step temple with a drum. I was like, I don't really want to pet a horse. Like I was all like things I didn't want. And I had no idea of like what I did want. What I really needed was a dual diagnosis program that was going to deal with my substance use and my social anxiety and depression. I needed a program that was going to have a family component that was going to bring my family in because I really needed to work on some crap with my parents. And I needed, a program that was gonna really, challenge me and not let me get away with hiding in the back of the room, the place that was gonna like really make it so that I had to focus. And I got lucky in that the place that I picked because of things I didn't want wound up having all the things that I needed. And so, but it was luck for me. It was not design.
Yeah, I think to your point, Chris. That's another thing that I think is misleading. Is everybody thinks rehab is going to be that white coat, that hospital building, that psych ward looking thing. And when I rolled up to the house, I looked at the driver and I was like, "Is this it?" And he's like, "Yeah, were you expecting a hospital?" And I said, "Yeah, I mean, kinda." And he was like, "It's just a house with like 8 rooms in it," and that made it way more comfortable for me.
I
You
think
know.
you bring up a good point because I get the feeling like when you start thinking about rehab, it feels like a sentence
Hmm.
more than it does a place where you're going to actually go and get better. Like I'm going to leave and I'm sentenced here to 28 days of whatever, and then I'm going to get out. But it's not really that, is it?
I don't want that hospital setting to get a bad rap though, because that's what mine was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really, it was a locked ward. Those that were smokers, I've never been a smoker, but those that were smokers weren't allowed to smoke. They had to have the chewing gum. So mine was, I called my insurance and I have Kaiser, so I was limited, and I said, I want something, kind of like what Dave said, like as soon as possible. Like I needed to get in right away before I changed my mind. And and when I went in there, I did hear the door lock behind me, and we weren't allowed to leave without, I mean, it was voluntary. We could go if we wanted, and people did. But I don't want people, just because it's in that hospital type setting, I don't want them to think that, I mean, it wasn't sterile. It wasn't, we had our own rooms. We had a big fun, TV night, and, played sober bingo and all that stuff. Although it was in a hospital, it was in a hospital. But just don't be afraid if I just don't want that to get a negative connotation, because I had a really good experience with that.
Awesome.
That's awesome. I'm glad you put a voice on that. You know what I mean? Because I don't know that experience, so I don't even know what that looks like. I know that was something that was kind of daunting to me if that was I was gonna walk into. But I love that you just put a different voice onto that, because I think that's important for people to hear too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Yep.
sure. What about you, Scott? How'd you end up where you ended up?
Yeah.
It's like Chris said, I kind of got lucky. Miley was just doing some looking, called the insurance company, and they recommended the first one that was poop. And then when I called them back, they recommended a different one, and it was great. So I mean, I wish there's some science to it. Word of mouth, you can't trust that either. You go somewhere and they're telling you to go to bed at 10 o'clock, and that pisses them off, and they leave. It could have been a great place, but they just weren't in the right place. So, yeah, I wish it was a cooler story.
But I
No,
think
that's great.
I think if there are like parents or loved ones who are like trying to figure this out, like I know like they want to know like what's your success rate. And I know at our treatment program, I get that question all the time, like what's your success rate? And there's no way to know. It's like because you can do a survey, but the people who pick up the phone are the people who are doing well. People who are not doing well are not picking up the phone when the rehab calls them 6 months later. So, you know, you have programs that are like, we have an 80, 90% success rate. And I'm like, you may be the best program in the world, but that's not a real number. That's the number of people who picked up your phone and agreed to do the survey. And that's going to be a self-selecting group. But I think parents especially get, especially when a lot of money's involved, they get very focused on like, what's your success rate? We don't want to have to do this twice. And you kind of can't you can't think like that. If you're going into it with that kind of mindset, it's not going to be helpful. It's sometimes it takes, I went to an outpatient first and then I fell apart as a dry drunk and then I went to inpatient and then that finally stuck for me. But it's not a lot of people are sort of a one chip wonder where it's the first time it just takes and they just kind of it's all good from there.
Gotcha. Okay, so
This,
one last question I'm going to
yeah.
throw out there really quick. Um, Talk a little bit, and Dave, you touched on this a little bit. I would love to hear, and this we could probably do a totally separate episode, so just give me like the highlight reel.
Hmm.
What's it like when you get out? Because
Yeah.
I know that transition from a totally safe environment to suddenly dealing with the stresses of life and the stresses of family and all of the other stuff when that hits you, that's got to be one hell of a shock. So I would love to hear a little bit of input on what that looks like. And we might seriously just have to come back and do a separate episode on that.
Yep.
Yeah. First of all, I would be on that episode, but but for me, it was scary. It was eye-opening that I may have stopped drinking, but I still had a lot of the same traits that I needed to work through, like manipulating, blaming others for things, and not being able to take ownership of my own actions. And just because I was not drinking, I thought that I was the one that deserved the pass, but kind of what I think Chris said, like life kept going while I was gone and I came back, and it's up to me to figure out how to fit my new self into that life. And once I accepted that, it got easier, but I fought against it for a little bit. I wanted people to I don't know, like, hey, I'm not drinking, so I did the thing that everybody wanted me to do. So now what? Like, accept me, embrace me for who I am now. But that's not really how it works, So it took a lot of navigating to get to where I am now. That first year was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I think it's tough also because if your family unit doesn't do the work too, then it's hard, right? If you've done all this work on sort of changing yourself and then everybody else kind of thought you were the problem and you were the only thing that needed to change, and that's just not how it works. And so my when I got out, my ex-wife, was still my wife at the time, but like she didn't want to stop going out. She wanted to go to pub trivia with all our friends and she wanted to still like, travel and like, and there was a lot of resentment, I think, that I now had limitations because in early sobriety, I wasn't willing to put myself into situations like I got out of treatment on October 1st and that holidays I said to my family, I'm not doing family holidays this year. I can't. And I got a lot of grief from people for that. And I was like, listen, you can have me this year and it's going to fall apart, or you can miss this one year and have me for the rest of the Christmases.
Right.
But there was a lot of resentment. And I had to, obviously my marriage didn't work out. And that was one of the reasons why, but I was able to keep it together by working my own program. So
Hmm.
I got out of rehab. I was sober for 3 weeks, felt absolutely flat the fuck on my face. Drank like it was my relapse, like it was my job for 2.5 weeks. went back to Brookside for 3 days detox because I had had such a great experience with them and remembered, you know what, you have all of these tools. You learned this lesson. You knew this might happen. And then that's my sober date, February 28th. And so, yep, relapse does happen. It sucks. It's a terrible fact, but we all have to know that. So that was my experience after rehab.
Gotcha.
Yeah, for me, my first two that I went, I was going for other people. And so it didn't work out very well. When I got out, it was the first time I was kind of on a high, kind of like I think what Billy said, a couple weeks where I was like, yeah, feeling
Cocky.
great. Yeah, it's super cocky. And then fell on my face on that one. And then, like I said, this after the second one, all it took after the second one was my grandfather shaking my hand with $100 bill in it. And I had spent all my money at treatment buying people pop. And because I knew I was having thoughts, and I'm like, I didn't want to have money. Grandpa shook my hand, gave me $100 bill. 4 hours after treatment, I was wasted. But the third one, when I went in there, I was doing it for myself finally. And when you get out of there, see, my story is just kind of a screwy one. The first thing that happened to me was I ran out of time at sober living, and I was technically homeless. I was living in my truck, and that's just a kick in the ding dong right there. So I was like, screw it. Well, I'm in my truck, nobody to watch over me now, so I went back. The fourth one, and I know we touched on it a little bit here and there about making friends in treatment. It's going to happen, and you probably need one or two people to talk to. My fourth one, when I went in, I was like, I am not talking to a single person. I'm going to work on myself. Now, the work that I did was from the previous treatment that I was in. This one, I didn't do any of their work. I was just journaling and going through my notes from the previous treatment, but I got busy, you know what I mean? And when I got out of that one, it was a completely different ballgame. I was ready for anything. My mindset, I mean, after 4 times, something's got to click. You know what I mean? I know people that have done more, but at some point, and it finally did, because I did it for myself on the third one. Something major happened, clearly wasn't ready. And then on the fourth one, I mean, I was pissed and ready to take my life back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's it's really cool. I'm gonna wrap it up now, I think.
Mm.
It's really cool to hear and just listen to you four talk. Even though I don't have this experience, I can still relate to some of it, but I can tell by listening to you four talk that you all know you've all been in that boat and you all know and I can hear you guys relate to your own little stories and pick out the pieces and all of the stuff, and then you have what was in common, the fear, what was going to happen to my family, the connections you made when you were there, how did you decide, like there's all of this commonality that came out, and then what you did after has a lot of commonality too. But one things I heard you all say was you don't find your similarities without being vulnerable. You all met people you would have never had a conversation with before. But when you started opening up, you started meeting new and pretty awesome people. And that's something that I know I can relate to, and I know Julie can relate to, because she was one of those people for me. Like she would
Yeah.
have been never have been a person I would have walked past her in the grocery store in a heartbeat,
Oh, we've
right?
said that before. Like if I saw Steve at a party, I never would have like wanted to be his friend.
Right.
Um,
So
like on the surface, there was nothing in common. So no, I think that's a really important point there.
it is. I mean, it's pretty incredible once you start being vulnerable how similar we all are.
Hmm. Yeah.
And when you went to rehab, they helped you put your differences aside, which is pretty awesome. I just want to say thank you guys. You shared the good, the bad, what helped, what didn't, and even the struggle.
Hmm.
And I appreciate you guys coming here and spending the time and sharing those stories with us, because I hope this helps someone get a little bit more information. And if you need to reach out to any of those people,
or Steve and myself, we're
Yep.
all here
Yep.
to help get you some information and get you set the direction you need to go.
Yep. If you want to know more, just send us a message. So
Mhm.
thank you guys so much. Appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.